A chair crashed against the tiled floor of the Timberline diner. A mug rolled in a crooked circle before shattering beside a booth, scattering pieces across the wooden boards. A massive biker, broad, heavy, leather vest stretching across his chest, towered over the trembling waitress cornered near the counter. Her name tag glinted under the overhead lights. Monica. His voice dropped into a low, venomous growl. "You think being married gives you power? Lady, your husband can't save you now." Monica's hand trembled beside a fallen coffee pot, her fingers tightening instinctively as if gripping for strength. Fear flickered in her eyes, brief, fragile, before shifting into something firmer. A quiet resolve began to rise in her, steadying her breath, steadying her stance. What Duke Maddox didn't know was that the woman he was berating, cornering, and humiliating was married to the one man in Silver Ridge he could never afford to provoke. The one man whose arrival was already closer than anyone in that diner realized. Quick question before the story continues. Tell me in the comments. What city or country are you watching from? Tap subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss more stories like this. Hit the like button and share this video with someone who loves powerful storytelling. Hours earlier, Silver Ridge had woken to a calm, peaceful morning. The mountains surrounding the town stood tall and silent beneath the soft stretch of dawn. Pine trees rustled in slow, lazy waves. The air carried the sweetness of early rain and the comfort of a town that had learned how to rest. At the center of that quiet stood the Timberline diner, glowing with warm light, its silver trim shining faintly through the morning mist. Inside, Monica Ellis moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood people, someone who knew how to create comfort even when the world outside grew restless. She slid cinnamon rolls onto plates, refilled cups before anyone asked, and greeted each customer with a gentle warmth that made them feel seen. Her presence softened the room. People didn't just appreciate her, they relied on her to brighten their mornings. Marrying Sheriff Daniel Ellis had brought her to Silver Ridge 3 years earlier, and though the town still had its rough edges, she had carved a place in it with kindness, patience, and steady resilience. Locals loved her not just because she was good at her job, but because she treated everyone with the same level of dignity: truckers, retirees, hikers, families, strangers passing through. That morning, she laughed softly at a joke shared by 2 truckers seated near the window. She carried plates to the Marshalls, placing an extra napkin under Mrs. Marshall's cup just the way she liked. She helped an elderly hiker tighten his backpack strap before he left, wishing him a safe journey up the ridge. But beneath the diner's cheerful rhythm, something else began to stir. Several regulars kept glancing toward the large front window. Quick, uneasy looks, small frowns, subtle signals exchanged across the room. Monica didn't notice at first, not until she caught sight of Mrs. Halpern twisting her napkin with trembling fingers. Monica stepped closer. "Everything all right, Mrs. H?" The older woman gave a tight smile. "Oh, nothing to worry about, dear. Weather's acting up today." But the weather wasn't what had her hands shaking. Outside, dark clouds settled over the mountains like a heavy warning. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, growing deeper each time. The diner's lights flickered for just a moment, long enough for heads to lift and eyes to meet. A young man near the counter leaned toward his friend and whispered under his breath, "The Iron Vipers are riding today." The words fell like a stone into still water. The Iron Vipers didn't come to Silver Ridge often, but when they did, the town's quiet spirit shrank just a little. Their presence meant tension. Their presence meant fear. Their presence meant trouble. Monica wiped her hands on her apron, unaware of the shift in the air as she carried another tray of plates to a waiting family. Then it began, a distant rumble. Steady, growing, deep enough to shake the window panes. Motorcycle engines, more than one, more than 3, a whole formation. The sound escalated, closer, heavier, vibrating through the diner's floor until even Monica paused mid-step. The Iron Vipers had arrived. The roar outside grew into a vibrating force that seemed to press against the diner windows. Customers turned toward the entrance just as the heavy door swung open, banging against the stopper with a sharp metallic thud. The air shifted. The warmth inside collapsed into a heavy, stifling silence. Duke Maddox stepped inside first. He moved with the confidence of a man who believed the world owed him space. Broad shoulders pushed against worn leather, faded patches stretched across his vest like old battle marks. A jagged scar crawled from the corner of his jaw down his neck, the kind of scar that suggested violence had followed him for a long time. His boots thudded against the floor with slow, deliberate force, each step claiming ownership of the room. His eyes swept the diner with lazy arrogance, gauging every person present, almost daring someone to challenge him. Behind him, 4 members of the Iron Vipers filed in, loud and careless, laughing as though they had walked into a bar built specifically for them. Their presence swallowed the remaining pockets of comfort that had survived the storm outside. A mother gathered her children closer. A man in a baseball cap suddenly found the floor deeply interesting. A pair of truckers exchanged stiff looks, then resumed eating in silence, their hands trembling slightly around their forks. Families near the exit began slipping out quietly, hoping to escape before the gang noticed them. The atmosphere tightened, like a held breath about to burst. Monica felt her stomach turn, but she steadied herself. Fear pricked the back of her neck, yet she kept her posture upright. Kindness was her instinct, but bravery was something she had learned. She inhaled slowly, wiped her palms on her apron, and approached the newcomers because the diner depended on her to keep it running, even when danger walked straight through the door. Duke noticed her before she reached the table. His gaze locked onto her in a way that felt both predatory and dismissive. He leaned back in the booth he had claimed, arms stretching across the seat, hands drumming casually as though settling in for a show. His mouth pulled into a smirk that carried its own insult. "Well," he said, dragging the word out, "haven't seen your kind serving around here." The sentence slithered through the diner, hitting every customer with a jolt of disgust. A few people shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking toward Monica, silently urging her to walk away, to avoid the confrontation spiraling toward her. Monica swallowed the rising sting and kept her voice even. "Welcome to Timberline. What can I get you?" Her calmness only fueled the bikers' amusement. They burst into mocking laughter, elbowing each other as Duke looked her over like she was a curiosity rather than a human being. One of the men leaned forward, whispering loudly enough for half the diner to hear. "Look at her shaking. Think she'll drop the coffee." Another added, "Girl like her should know her place." Monica felt the words like small blows, but she refused to let them see defeat. She steadied her tray, straightened her back, and repeated the question. Duke's smirk widened at her composure, as if her restraint offended him more than fear ever could. Then, without warning, he slammed his palm against the table. Silverware jumped. Cups rattled. The sudden violence made Monica flinch despite her best effort to remain still. "I said, are you deaf?" The diner fell completely silent as the echo of his shout lingered in the tense, heavy air. The force of Duke's shout seemed to vibrate through Monica's chest, but she held the tray tight against her palm and forced herself to breathe. Her hands trembled, betraying the fear curling through her stomach, yet she refused to let that fear control the rest of her. She inhaled slowly, pressing the air deep into her lungs, steadying the tremor inch by inch. She was not going to cry. She was not going to break. Not for Duke. Not for anyone like him. The diner remained frozen in stunned silence. Even the storm outside seemed to pause, as though the world was waiting to see what Monica would do next. Her throat felt tight, but she lifted her chin, finding a strength inside herself that surprised even her. "You will not talk to me like that," she said softly, but firm enough to cut through the tension. The words settled over the room like a stone dropped into still water. Duke blinked. For a brief moment, he seemed almost confused that someone he considered beneath him had dared to speak with any measure of dignity. Then, the confusion twisted into something darker. His mouth curled into a grin that held no humor at all. A low rumble of laughter spilled from his throat, growing louder until it filled the entire diner. His men joined him, pounding the table, clapping, hooting. as if Monica had just performed a comedy routine instead of defending her humanity. Duke's laughter died, replaced by a glare sharp enough to slice. He pushed himself out of the booth with a heavy grunt. When he stood to his full height, he towered over Monica like a wall of leather and rage. The lights above cast his shadow across her face, swallowing what little comfort the diner still offered. "Well now," he drawled, "seems like the little waitress got herself a spine." His men leaned forward eagerly, eyes gleaming with the kind of excitement that came from witnessing someone else's humiliation. One of them slapped the table and sneered, "Teach her a lesson, Duke?" Another added, "Show her what happens when someone gets smart." The tension coiled tighter, wound so thickly around the room that even breathing felt dangerous. Customers stayed glued to their seats, too afraid to move, too horrified to look away. Monica could feel every stare, every silent plea, every shared fear, but none of it pushed her backward. She remained where she stood. A family near the corner booth tried to rise quietly, hoping to slip out unnoticed. The mother held her toddler close, eyes darting nervously toward the exit. But as soon as they shifted from their seats, Duke slammed the table again with a force that rattled every plate in the diner. "Sit down," he barked. The command snapped through the air like a whip. The family dropped back into their seats instantly, the toddler beginning to whimper before the mother covered his ears. Monica's heartbeat thudded painfully, but she didn't retreat. Duke took a single step closer, close enough for her to smell the bitter mix of gasoline and stale cigarettes clinging to his clothes. His grin widened, slow and deliberate, the grin of a man who enjoyed the moment before the cruelty began. Then he reached out. His hand closed around her wrist, not hard enough to injure, but firm enough to claim control, firm enough to deliver a threat without words. "Someone needs to remind you where you stand," he murmured. His grip tightened slightly. Monica didn't move. A strained murmur rippled through the diner, soft enough to hide beneath the storm's distant growl but tense enough to thicken the air. People leaned toward each other cautiously, exchanging quick, alarmed whispers. No one dared speak loudly, yet the words still found their way through the room like a warning carried on a trembling breath. "Does he know she's the sheriff's wife?" someone murmured. The sentence barely existed above a whisper, but it carried more weight than a shout. More heads lowered, more hands tightened around cups. No one wanted to draw Duke's attention, and Duke remained oblivious, blinded by the inflated confidence that had always shielded him from the consequences of his own behavior. The arrogance wrapped around him like armor, thick enough to keep him from noticing the panic he was causing. Everything in his posture said he saw Monica as powerless, as someone whose dignity existed for him to crush. Monica's wrist ached under his grip, but she forced herself to stay calm. She shifted just slightly, and the faint movement caught the light. Her wedding ring glimmered, small but unmistakable. Duke's eyes darted to it. The sight of the gold band made him smirk, a slow curl of his lip that revealed exactly what he thought of it. His fingers slid upward toward the ring, tapping it unnecessarily, mocking its meaning with a lazy confidence that made Monica's stomach twist. "Well now," he muttered, his tone dripping with ridicule, "looks like somebody got herself hitched. Wonder what kind of weak man signed up for that." The words carried a freshly sharpened cruelty. A few customers flinched. Monica felt heat rise inside her, not just from fear, but from indignation, a quiet fire burning beneath her ribs. Duke's smirk widened, feeding off the reaction he imagined she wouldn't dare show. He leaned closer, breathing danger into the narrow space between them, as though the ring's existence amused him. Duke tightened his grip just enough to remind Monica he held the upper hand. She steadied herself again, planting her feet firmly, refusing to shrink under him. She drew a breath and tried to step back, slow and deliberate, hoping to create even a sliver of distance. But Duke moved with her, blocking her with the certainty of someone who believed he controlled every part of the moment. His shadow followed her step for step, heavy and looming. Then, with a sudden flick of his arm, he shoved the fallen coffee pot beside them. It skidded along the counter's edge before tumbling to the floor and shattering. The crash tore through the diner, making several customers gasp. The smell of spilled coffee drifted upward, sharp and bitter. Duke pointed at the mess. "Clean it," he muttered. "Might as well start learning your place." Monica stared at the broken pieces but didn't move toward them. Her silence unsettled him. His eyebrow twitched in irritation, as if her refusal to obey disrupted the script he expected her to follow. The room felt smaller now, tighter, pulled inward by the power struggle unfolding at the center. Before Duke could speak again, the diner door creaked open. Cold air swept inside. Someone stepped through the doorway. Duke didn't turn. Not yet. The diner door drifted open on a gust of cold wind, letting in the scent of wet asphalt and pine. For a moment, no one breathed. The customers near the entrance stiffened, their eyes widening with the desperate kind of relief that only appears when hope finally walks into danger. Sheriff Daniel Ellis stepped inside. He carried no rushed urgency, no flashy authority, no raised voice. He simply entered with a calm steadiness that settled over the room like a blanket laid across a trembling child. His face was unreadable, an expression carved from quiet discipline and years spent dealing with men who mistook intimidation for power. His boots moved across the floor with slow precision, each step measured, each breath deliberate. But even in that calm, something simmered beneath the surface. A tension formed of instinct, of a husband who sensed something was wrong before fully seeing it. A few customers tried to signal him without being obvious. A man near the counter nudged his shoulder toward the back of the diner. Mrs. Halpern gripped her napkin and subtly pointed her chin toward Monica. The marshals exchanged a desperate glance with Daniel, hoping he understood the urgency without drawing Duke's attention. Daniel's eyes traveled across the diner. He saw the tense shoulders, the trembling hands, the frightened children tucked close to their parents. He saw the broken coffee pot still glistening on the floor. Then his gaze followed the thickening shadow that fell across Monica's face. Duke Maddox still had his back turned to the door, still looming, still threatening, still gripping Monica's wrist as if she belonged beneath him. Daniel's hand curled once at his side, subtle but sharp. He stepped forward, his steps slow, controlled, deliberate, steps that did not ask for permission because they were grounded in certainty. When he finally spoke, his voice did not rise. It did not tremble. It simply filled the space between them with a strength that froze the entire room. "Is there a reason you're standing over my wife?" The word wife struck the air like a gunshot. Conversations halted mid-breath. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Even the storm outside seemed to hush, as though the sky itself leaned in to witness what would happen next. Duke's grip on Monica loosened. His shoulders stiffened. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he turned around. His eyes landed on Daniel, and for the first time since entering the diner, a flicker of something that wasn't arrogance cracked through his expression. Recognition, then disbelief, then the smallest shimmer of fear. Behind him, his men shifted uneasily. Their postures lost confidence. One of them nudged another, whispering, "No way, that's her husband? That's the sheriff?" They exchanged glances filled with the kind of dread that comes from realizing a line had been crossed so severely that retreat might no longer be possible. Daniel moved closer and positioned himself between Duke and Monica, shielding her with a quiet, commanding presence. Monica finally exhaled, her chest trembling with overdue relief. She stepped back, rubbing her wrist gently as she watched the tension escalate from a safe distance. Duke tried to straighten, tried to recover the swagger that had vanished the moment Daniel spoke. He puffed out his chest and forced a grim smirk, as if pretending confidence might somehow erase what everyone had witnessed. "What's the issue, Sheriff?" he asked, aiming for nonchalance but falling short. "We were just talking." But his voice cracked, slightly, enough for his men to hear, enough for everyone to notice, enough for Monica to understand that Duke's bravado was slipping apart at the seams. Then he said the words that sealed his fate. She needed to learn respect. Daniel's expression didn't change immediately. He simply stiffened, the movement small but unmistakable. His jaw tightened. His breath deepened, and slowly, deliberately, his hand moved toward his belt. The air inside the diner felt thick enough to choke. Every customer had gone still, suspended in the moment between Duke's arrogance and whatever the sheriff would do next. Daniel's hand rested lightly on his belt, not threatening, not dramatic, simply there, a quiet reminder of the authority he carried. "You're done here," Daniel said. The words were soft, almost conversational, but they carried a weight that pressed through the room with the force of a falling tree. Duke's jaw tightened. His pride bristled. His men exchanged uneasy glances, feeling the shift even before Duke felt it himself. Duke puffed out his chest and tried to regain the dominance that had shattered when he realized who Monica belonged to. He squared his shoulders and lifted his chin, forcing a smirk he no longer believed in. "Careful, Sheriff," he muttered. "You talk real big for a man walking into someone else's moment." Daniel didn't react. He didn't blink. He simply stood there, steady as stone, his eyes fixed on Duke with a calm that made the entire gang falter. There was no anger in his expression, only certainty, a certainty that terrified them more than any raised voice ever could. "You threatened my wife," Daniel said quietly. "The moment you laid a hand on her, your moment ended." A hush fell tighter around the diner. Several customers stepped back instinctively, giving the two men a wider circle of space. Chairs scraped quietly as people moved away from the center. Even the children stayed silent, sensing the magnitude of what was unfolding. Duke swallowed once, the movement visible above the edge of his vest. His gaze flicked from Daniel's steady eyes to Monica's trembling form behind him, then back to Daniel. Something desperate flickered through him, though he tried to bury it beneath more empty bravado. "You think I'm scared of you?" he barked, though his voice wavered. "You think a badge makes you untouchable?" Daniel took a slow step forward. "No," he replied, "but my restraint makes you lucky." The gang shifted uncomfortably again. One of them muttered, "Duke, man, maybe we should—" Duke snapped, "Shut up." He thrust out his arm aggressively, aiming to shove Daniel, or at least to reclaim a fraction of the power he had lost. The motion was fast, fueled by panic more than confidence. Daniel moved faster. Before Duke's hand reached him, Daniel's fingers closed around his wrist with a precision born from years of training. In a single controlled motion, he twisted Duke's arm downward and slammed him against the nearest table. Wood rattled. Silverware scattered. Duke let out a grunt as his chest hit the surface. In the same fluid motion, Daniel cuffed him, smooth, clean, decisive. The gang lurched forward in shock. Their chairs screeched against the floor as if they intended to rush Daniel, but before they could take more than a single step, the front door burst open again. Two deputies entered, Officer Ramirez and Officer Collins, alert, stern, hands on their belts. Customers must have called earlier, sending help racing toward the diner long before Daniel arrived. "Sheriff," Ramirez said, already reading the room. "Everything under control?" Daniel nodded. "Take him." The deputies grabbed Duke by the arms, lifting him from the table. His boots dragged along the floor as they pulled him toward the exit. Relief flooded through the diner, erupting into applause from customers who had held their fear too tightly for too long. But as Duke reached the doorway, he leaned toward Daniel with a venomous whisper only the sheriff could hear. "This ain't over." When the door shut behind Duke and the deputies, the diner finally exhaled. The tension that had held every person hostage melted into a trembling relief. Monica stood in the center of it all, her hands still shaking despite her efforts to stay composed. Her breath wavered, lifting and falling unevenly, as if her body was catching up to everything her mind had fought to stay strong through. Daniel stepped toward her, his expression softening as he reached for her gently. She leaned into him, not collapsing, not crumbling, but finally allowing herself the release she had denied while Duke hovered over her. Daniel's arms wrapped around her shoulders, steadying her with a warmth that made the fear drain from her slowly. "You're all right," he murmured. "I've got you." Monica nodded, though her voice still hadn't returned. Her muscles felt weak, but her spirit remained unbroken. She took one slow breath, then another, letting the safety of Daniel's presence wash over her like shelter from a long storm. Around them, customers began to rise from their seats. They approached cautiously, guilt written across their faces. The first apology came from the mother who had tried to leave earlier, her eyes wet with remorse. "I'm so sorry we didn't do more," she said. "We were scared." A trucker stepped beside her, rubbing the back of his neck. "We should have stood up sooner. You didn't deserve any of that." Others echoed the same, each voice carrying the weight of helplessness turned into regret. Monica held up her hand softly, meeting each worried gaze with understanding instead of blame. "It's okay," she said gently. "Everyone did what they could. You're safe, and I'm safe. That's what matters now." Her kindness disarmed their guilt. It reminded them why they admired her in the first place. Mr. Harlan, the diner owner, pushed through the small crowd, his apron still dusted with flour from the kitchen. His voice shook with both relief and gratitude. "Monica, I don't know how to thank you," he said. "And, Sheriff, you saved us today. You both did." He paused, swallowing the thickness in his throat. "As long as this diner stands, your meals are free. Both of you. For life." Daniel tried to decline, but Harlan raised a trembling hand. "Please, let me do at least that much." Word spread through Silver Ridge by evening. People whispered through grocery aisles, over fences, and across parking lots. Duke Maddox, arrested, charged with assault, intimidation, harassment, caught humiliating the sheriff's wife in front of half the diner. For once, the Iron Vipers lost their swagger. Several members abandoned the gang out of shame, unwilling to follow a leader who had been brought down in front of the entire town. Their reputation cracked, and their presence in Silver Ridge began to fade. But Monica's reputation grew. Her courage, standing firm despite fear, dignity shining through humiliation, became the story the town clung to. People spoke about her strength, her bravery, her refusal to break even when danger towered inches away. The next morning, Monica returned to work. She walked toward the Timberline diner with the same apron folded neatly around her waist, the same soft smile she always carried, the same calm steps that had guided her through countless mornings before. But this time, when she opened the door, she didn't walk into a quiet breakfast rush. Every single customer stood. They rose from their seats in unison, filling the diner with a wave of respect that washed over her like warm sunlight after a long, cold night. And Monica, steady, humble, unshaken, smiled back. Thanks for watching this powerful story. If it moved you in any way, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps more people discover stories like this.